There are moments in history when it feels like the past isn't just behind us, it's staring straight back, daring us to make the same mistake twice. That's what Senator Dick Durbin warned about when he took the Senate floor. His voice wasn't calm, it was urgent. Because this wasn't another political speech, it was a warning that the same corruption, the same abuse of power that nearly broke America 50 years ago, was creeping back again. Durbin didn't start with Pam Bondi's name or any headline-grabbing quote. He started with history. With Richard Nixon, he reminded everyone how Nixon's paranoia led to the infamous enemies list, a roster of journalists, lawmakers, and critics that the White House secretly tried to destroy using government power.
Mr. Seibert resisted President Trump's demands to bring charges without sufficient evidence against New York Attorney General Letitia James and former FBI Director James Comey. Mr. Seibert, a Republican appointed by Donald Trump just a few weeks ago, stayed true to his oath to the Constitution and his commitment to follow the facts and the law. And for that, he was forced to resign his office. In his place, President Trump installed his personal attorney, an attorney with no experience as a prosecutor, never did it before, to indict James Comey in a politically motivated case considered by career prosecutors in that office too weak to bring charges. This indictment represents the latest step in President Trump's long crusade to weaponize the federal government against his perceived political enemies, a return to the days of Richard Nixon. We remember when the president was initially impeached in the first of his historic 2 impeachments, after he attempted to pressure a foreign ally to dig up dirt against Joe Biden and his family. And we remember when President Trump turned a mob of insurrectionists loose on our Capitol, where they violently attempted to prevent the peaceful transfer of power leading to his second impeachment. I will never forget that day as long as I live, January 6th. It has been my honor to serve in this chamber 29 years. I've seen a lot. I'm honored to represent a great state like Illinois, but I will never forget that moment when we were sitting here counting the Electoral College votes as to what the American people had decided on the next president. Vice President Pence was presiding. We were seated in our chairs. I noticed something unusual. Those 2 doors opened, and 4 or 5 people walked in up to the vice president and literally yanked him out of his chair and took him out the door. We knew there was a political demonstration outside, but all of a sudden it turned bad and scary and dangerous. The Capitol Police came in and announced to us seated in this chamber, stay in your desks. We're going to make this a safe chamber in the Capitol. Don't worry about those people demonstrating outside. They're not going to get close to the chamber. Just stay where you are. We looked at one another and thought, what's next? Well, what was next was 10 minutes later, the same policeman came in and said, leave immediately. Don't take anything with you, just get out of the chamber. It's too dangerous for you to stay here. And we all, Democrats and Republicans, filed out those doors. You know what happened next. The insurrectionists took over this building. It was one of the most embarrassing moments in the history of the United States Capitol building. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, if you heard the news that the House of Commons in Parliament had its door broken down and people raided the chamber. You'd say to yourself, what is going on in England, for goodness sakes? The House of Commons taken over by people in the street? That is exactly what happened here. And it happened on January 6th. And so this president, embarrassed by that moment, maybe, who knows if he's ever embarrassed, decided he would go after the people who prosecuted the insurrectionists, the people who were prosecuted for crimes like beating up policemen. You all came here today and we welcome you to this chamber. The reason you're safe in this building today is a lot of women and men in uniform who are guarding you and me and all of our staff so that we can do the people's business. Those people were under attack by the January 6th insurrectionists. These were not curious tourists who came in here. They ended up beating on these police, and 140 of them were seriously injured. If you believe it, in this second administration, the president has gone further than Richard Nixon and what he's done before. His political appointees have fired FBI agents and federal prosecutors who were called on to prosecute the insurrectionists. He has installed loyalists whose chief qualification is their loyalty to him, not their loyalty to the law or the Constitution. We recently learned a top federal prosecutor in Sacramento was fired after she advised the Border Patrol to comply with a court order. Yes, the Trump administration fired a career prosecutor for following a court order. Never in our history in the history of our country has a president so brazenly demanded the baseless prosecution of his rivals, and he doesn't even try to conceal it or hide it. He glories in this constitutional outrage. In a social media post, President Trump issued a command to Attorney General Bondi, and I quote, "They impeached me twice and indicted me 5 times over nothing. Justice must be served now. We can't delay any longer." He's referring to the prosecution of James Comey. Imagine that, a sitting president commanding his attorney general to prosecute state and federal officials who simply tried to uphold the rule of law. That's exactly what this president is doing. What Richard Nixon was stopped from doing, he is doing. Since Watergate, Republican and Democratic presidents alike respect the independence of the Justice Department, recognizing that shielding it from the pull of politics was essential to safeguarding the rule of law. Under President Trump, those constitutional guardrails have been removed, destroyed. I want to be clear. What you're seeing from the Trump White House is not normal. This just isn't some inside the Beltway drama. If the president can turn the Department of Justice and the FBI into his own personal police force to target his political enemies, he can just as easily turn it against ordinary Americans. And the dam is already starting to break. The president sent active duty forces into Los Angeles earlier this year to put down protest of his administration's cruel immigration raids. He threatened to make war on the city of Chicago, which I'm honored to represent, by sending forces into that city as well as Memphis, Tennessee, and has now ordered the military to Portland with authorization to use, quote, full force in Portland, Oregon. The governor of Oregon, the mayor of Portland said what the president said about being at war and unlivable is just plain wrong, and yet he does it. It's a slippery slope into authoritarianism. Once DOJ and our military have been politicized, there are few guardrails left. So while today it's Letitia James and James Comey who are the targets, tomorrow it could be our fellow citizens who dare to even criticize the policies of the Trump regime. That is the risk we face and the danger that lies ahead in its perilous moment. That's why I've opened an investigation calling for answers from Attorney General Bondi, including making available several Trump-installed loyalists for questioning. The American people deserve to know if the chief law enforcement agency of the United States is following the Constitution or pursuing political revenge. Let me end this.
It was one of the darkest stains on American democracy. Nixon weaponized the Department of Justice, and the country nearly lost its soul. Durbin said that after Watergate, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, promised one thing: never again. They agreed that no president, no matter how powerful, could ever use the DOJ as a political weapon. That promise, Durbin warned, is now being broken. He spoke slowly at first, but the chamber grew silent when he mentioned what triggered his outrage. The resignation of a man named Eric Seibert, the acting U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. Seibert, an appointee and a lifelong Republican, refused an order to file charges against New York Attorney General Letitia James and former FBI Director James Comey. The problem: there was no evidence. Durbin said Seibert stood by his oath to the Constitution, not a politician, and for that he was forced out. In Seibert's place, the White House installed someone new, someone with no experience as a prosecutor, but with one important qualification: loyalty. Durbin said it plainly: this was how democracies rot. When loyalty outranks the law, he warned, justice becomes a performance, not a principle. And that's when he dropped the name that's now at the center of the storm: Pam Bondi. Durbin accused Bondi, the sitting Attorney General, of following direct political orders to prosecute individuals who had simply done their jobs. In one post on social media, Durbin said, the president openly commanded her to bring charges against James Comey. His words were clear: justice must be served now. We can't delay any longer. Durbin paused. That, he said, is not leadership, that's dictatorship. He wasn't exaggerating. He called it a constitutional outrage, a president using his Attorney General Pam Bondi to punish perceived enemies. A chilling echo of Watergate, except this time, Durbin said, the lines between politics and law had completely disappeared. Bondi wasn't being portrayed as a neutral guardian of justice anymore. She was now the symbol of a Department of Justice bent to one man's will. But Durbin didn't stop there. He went back to a moment that still haunts him, January 6th. He described it like he was reliving it in real time. Sitting in the Senate chamber counting the electoral votes, when suddenly the doors burst open. Secret Service agents rushed Vice President Pence out of his seat. Alarms blared. Police yelled for senators to evacuate immediately. Durbin's voice cracked as he recalled those moments, the pounding on the doors, the fear, the disbelief that the capital of the United States was under attack by its own citizens. They weren't tourists, he said, they were attackers. Over 140 police officers were injured defending democracy that day, and now, he said, the same administration that vowed law and order was firing prosecutors who dared to hold those attackers accountable. Durbin said Bondi's office had already removed or replaced several officials involved in those cases. People who had been following court orders were now being punished for doing their jobs. They were fired, Durbin said, for obeying the law. That's when the senator's speech shifted from outrage to warning. He said this wasn't just another partisan fight, this was a test of whether America still believes in the rule of law. Because once political power controls prosecution, the law no longer protects citizens, it controls them. Durbin reminded the chamber that presidents before had faced temptation. Even Nixon in his darkest days tried to use the Department of Justice as a personal tool for revenge. But Congress, both parties, stepped in to stop him. Back then, lawmakers had courage. They understood that defending the independence of justice wasn't about politics, it was about survival. But Durbin's question was brutal in its honesty: where is that courage today? He looked directly across the aisle and asked, is there one Republican senator in this chamber who gives a damn? The silence that followed was heavier than any speech. Then came one of the speech's most chilling passages. Durbin described how the administration had expanded its reach beyond the courts, into America's streets. He cited orders that sent active duty forces into Los Angeles, Portland, even threats to send them into Chicago and Memphis. Federal troops were being deployed against U.S. citizens protesting government policies. That's not law enforcement, Durbin said, that's control. He called it a slippery slope into authoritarianism. Once a president learns he can use the military to silence dissent and the attorney general to prosecute critics, he said, there are few guardrails left. Then Durbin tied it all together. Each firing, each ignored court order, each demand to go after someone, it all pointed to the same pattern. A slow-motion collapse of accountability. Democracy doesn't fall in one moment, he said. It falls in 1,000 quiet ones. And at the center of it all, according to Durbin, was Attorney General Pam Bondi, accused of turning the Justice Department into an instrument of vengeance. He said she had a choice: serve the law or serve the man who appointed her. And right now, all signs pointed to the latter. He closed with a direct appeal, not just to his colleagues, but to the American people. This is not normal, Durbin said. If the president can turn the Department of Justice and the FBI into his personal police force, he can just as easily turn it against any one of you. The room was silent. You could hear papers rustle, shoes scuff, even the air felt heavier. Durbin's final words weren't shouted, they were almost whispered. This is a code red for democracy. He said America had faced this test before, and passed. Republicans and Democrats once stood together to defend the Constitution from a corrupt president. But today, he said, too many remain silent, and silence, he warned, is complicity. Pam Bondi's name will likely appear in headlines for months. Investigations will drag on, questions will multiply, and narratives will twist. But Durbin's point was clear: this isn't about Bondi alone, it's about what her role represents, the politicization of justice itself. He ended by reminding everyone that democracy doesn't die with a bang. It dies when good people convince themselves it's not their problem. And that's where this story hits home. Because this isn't just a fight inside Congress, it's a fight for the soul of a nation that once promised never to go down this road again. If you're watching this and wondering why it matters, think about this: when truth becomes negotiable and justice becomes personal, it's not just politicians who suffer, it's everyone. Today it's prosecutors, tomorrow it's journalists, and eventually, it's anyone who dares to speak up. That's why Durbin's speech isn't about politics, it's a warning to all of us. The question isn't whether this can happen here, it already is. The question is whether anyone will stop it before it's too late. If you believe in a country where no one is above the law, where justice serves the people not power, then now is the time to pay attention. Stay informed, question everything, and never accept silence as normal. Because history doesn't repeat itself by accident, it repeats when people forget how it ended the first time. If this story made you think, if it made you realize how fragile democracy really is, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Because awareness isn't just protection, it's the first step toward accountability.